It's Tuesday. This looks like Trekland HQ, and we are live with my guest today, Glen Swanson, Space, NASA, and Star Trek historian and author. Today on episode, 312 of Trekland Tuesdays Live with me, Dr. Trek, Larry Nemechek, coming at you once again through Portal 47 via Trekland Treks. Here for some clarity, sanity, and the big picture in all things Star Trek, or at least in many things Star Trek anyway. I'm so glad to see everybody again. I know people are going to be popping in here to the chat. Hey, if you are new to Trekland Tuesdays Live, welcome, welcome. I can't wait to meet you, see how you came to us. At least I think we're live. Hey, everybody. You come on, gang. You're going to pop in any second, I know. There we go. All right. Boom. Hey, everybody. Yes, it's great to see you live. If you are new, you should go over and make sure to jump into the chat. There they are now. We've got a wonderful TTL community. Our Patreons, there's a lot of Portales here from Portal 47. There's a lot of folks from our other community. We still have a lot of lifers from Life Support Live, and it's all great. Introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're from. We are global. We've got folks in Europe and Australia. Maybe we'll conquer some other continents eventually, but it's great. What I do, though, is, and just so you know, if you are in Facebook, you will only see the Facebook comments. If you're on YouTube or Twitch, you will see everything. Just to say, you're welcome to come in from any platform. I'm going to get off on my topic today, and my topic today is a guest. That's always exciting. This year, we've been having guests on. I will get to the chat after we do that. I'll take a mini break, and then we'll hit the chat. So hang on to your questions. Although, while the guest is up, when it's a little different with guests, if you want to chat and have questions, I will try to keep an eye on the chat and ask things live. It's not always a guarantee because we get into our conversations. That's the way I do. This ain't a Twitch mainstream show, as you all know. So, but eventually we'll get back around to everything, okay? And if you just want to talk about what's going on in Trek today, we can save that for our chat later, right? But first off, I am so excited to have our guest today. Again, I first became aware of Glen. Glen Swanson is our guest today. And I first became aware of him through the year of his research that he was posting on all the socials for the 55th anniversary of the AMT model kit, which, yes, was historic, not just for Star Trek World, for Star Trek's production, because it enabled the building of the Galileo and vice versa, but also because of what it meant, and even the model plastic kit industry. So it's been fun to watch Glen and meet him from afar. Today's the first time we've talked actually live since we're coming at it from different ends of the country. But he's got a project going right now that's exciting, and he's been giving little teases and hints about it online too. So why don't I stop talking and bring him in right now? So, Glen Swanson, welcome to Trekland Tuesdays Live, and I'm so glad we finally got to meet, and I'm so glad to maybe give a signal boost to this latest project of yours.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted to finally see you and hear you in person, Larry, through the wonders of the internet. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I tried to give a send off. Let me just say before what I've found out since, and what you talk about is. Let's just do this. There you are. Now I know you say, well, this was a few years ago, but I like this shot. This is your picture, but you've got all the, I've got the logo here, but this is, let me go to this. This is some of your past science writing here. Well, I'm trying to, can we do this? Boom. There we go. Well, at least you'll see the other titles over there. How about I do that? There we go. You've been writing in NASA history, space history. You talk about having researched a lot for this new book that you're writing, that we've got. It's coming up, that you've got the Kickstarter going currently for. There we go. Let's just bring that in. Inspired Enterprise, which is a great title. How NASA, Smithsonian, and others helped launch Star Trek. But you've got this background working in NASA, space history, flight history. I guess you've got that as an interest. That was career. Why don't you tell everybody what you did before you got into this? Because I totally see the segue from then to now.
Right. Well, I've always been interested in the history of spaceflight. My formal academic background is as a historian. My undergraduate and graduate degrees are in history, and um, I have written a lot in the past. I founded a magazine called Quest, and that one picture that you saw there,
Mhm.
which just last year celebrated its 30th anniversary of publication, which is really rare for a print magazine to still be around as a print magazine for 30 years. It's a quarterly publication on the history of spaceflight. For quite a while, it was the world's only publication that was focused on that. And I did that in the 90s before starting work as the historian at the Johnson Space Center in
Mhm.
1998. So I've always been interested in the history of spaceflight, and even longer interested in Star Trek. So my interest in Star Trek, you know, basically got me going to interested in space, in the history of space fact as well as the history of science
Uh-huh.
fiction.
Well, I mean, I'm just kind of the other way around. I was a kid that was fascinated with the NASA program. Well, I was a kid when the moon landings were happening, so I came to Star Trek from that world. But that's what I loved about Star Trek, because it tried to be based in reality, and not just the science, but the historical timeline. It wasn't not that I looked down on, like I was too snooty to enjoy Star Wars, but eventually it was subconscious, and I realized that the reason I enjoyed Star Trek, whenever Kirk would have a speech when he would run through history, and he would start off with Napoleon and Hitler and wind up with Lee Kwan and Colonel Green or whatever. And it was like that was just reinforcing that their future was us.
Mhm.
And
Right.
and so historically, and also, which were my two big nerd interests, I guess, history and science. And I just, it was a sweet spot. So
Right.
that's and I appreciated the fact that there was always a science visor on Star Trek, and
Right. Right.
but I love this picture of you, because it totally shows your resume here, your CV, as it were.
Yeah, the top book is Before This Decade Is Out, the one with the
Mhm.
picture of the Apollo. That's Apollo 12 on the launch pad, actually. And I published that when I was working with NASA and as a civil servant. So it was published as a NASA book. And
Mm.
we had some money at the time to fund a project to do some research. And I actually started at the Johnson Space Center as their oral historian. They had
Oh,
started a new
okay.
oral history program where they were trying to capture the histories of a lot of the individuals that worked
Mhm.
on the Apollo program, because they were getting older. I mean, 1999, you're suddenly at the 30th anniversary of the first
Right.
Apollo lunar landing. So these people were getting up there, and they realized that the astronauts, their stories have been told and
Mhm.
retold almost to the point of mythology. But a lot of the 500,000 people that worked at the peak of the Apollo program, their story has not been told. And so I
Right.
was very interested in that, because I was,
Oh,
I
yeah.
grew up, and you, I'm sure, have grown up on the Carrying the Fire by Michael Collins, and Return to Earth by Buzz Aldrin, and a lot of the books that were written by the astronauts, Countdown
Yeah.
by Frank Borman.
And
Uh,
so you're going to the source material, the books. Now,
yeah.
I'm going to admit that I haven't read a lot of the books, but I will, The Right Stuff, which wasn't an
Hmm.
astronaut book, but it was the documenting that for the first time. But by the time you're talking about 1999, well, what, Apollo 13 had been out, and that was glorifying, the problem solvers and the work,
Right.
the problem peoplers,
Yeah.
and in CSC to not CSC. What is it to Ox? I've just gone blank.
Oh, switch to aux. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Or say CVS to Ox. No, not
Yeah.
C, but you know what I mean. Yes. Someone in the chat will pop in with the right acronym.
Right. Right. There's
Um,
even little models of that switch, those toggle switch I've seen.
yeah. But Apollo 13 really, shared the spotlight and showed that was a success. Well, they were always a success due to all those faceless people in the room.
Hmm.
Whether and then Apollo 13, you start with Gene Kranz on down, and especially everybody else around, and the simulator people and all of that. So that time was very ripe to the world to suddenly wake up, and then we progress along to the fact that you've got the hidden figures women who were fighting on two fronts, who were saving the space program in the early days
Hmm.
and weren't getting the recognition at all. So I'm just a sucker for a good space movie. Um, I don't always have the time to read through the books, but I'm so thrilled to have all those astronauts and all their memoirs
Right.
doing that. But I think some of the main, that's it, the main stage, the main folks behind the scenes at NASA have done some books too.
Hmm. Yeah, it kind of trained me in a way to look at some of the lesser people, not only in the Apollo program, but then when it comes to Star Trek, because we know, the two Genes, the
Mhm.
Gene Kuhn and Gene Roddenberry. But do we really know beyond hearing their names? For example, Harvey Lind, you mentioned him as the first technical advisor for Star Trek. We run across his name, of course, in making of Star
Oh
Trek,
yeah.
and we hear about him, but do we really know who he was? Do we even know what he looks like? That was what was intriguing to me too, because I'd searched high and low for even a photograph of him. you know, uh,
Yeah.
this individual who worked on Star Trek and influenced it, and his fingerprints are all over it,
Mhm.
especially during the first season.
And
Uh,
was documented early in the making of Star Trek. Gene talks
mhm,
about his Harvey P. Lin
right,
memos.
but who
So
was
his
he?
name's been out there, but you're absolutely right. I just thought, well, that's the 60s. He's long past. We'll
Mhm.
never be able to, but you're right. Kidding faces. It's hard going back. It's hard sometimes even to find, and even to the 90s now, to get pictures of folks. But
Yeah.
because we didn't live on a camera on your phone in your pocket era.
Right.
So
So that's one of the things, that I pursue in depth with my new book, is to look at some of these other individuals' names, some of the names that we will be familiar with, but others that we won't be familiar with, and their influence and impact on the creation of Star Trek. And when I say Star Trek, the original series, because there's been a lot of books written since then, of course, about the
mhm.
influence that Star Trek has had on NASA and the astronauts, through the multiple series. But I'm focusing just on this early germination period, when everything was starting to come together in Gene's mind and creating the original series. What kind of influence has NASA had, and the
Right.
Smithsonian and some of these other individuals in the series that we really don't know much about?
Well, even your cover here. I know this photo. I mean, I couldn't tell you like the verse and day chapter and all, but that's Gene and Dee and Jimmy
Yep.
visiting one of the. I don't know if they're at Edwards or they're at, because it's a
Yeah, they're at
it's
Edwards
a
Air
plane,
Force
so they're
Base.
not at JPL. So
No, no, they're actually at the Dryden Flight Research Center, now the
okay,
Armstrong Center, at Edwards Air Force Base in California. And that photograph, although if you look really close, and some individuals will be quite perceptive, it's not exactly the same photo that appears in Making of Star Trek in Winfield's
hmm,
book, because DeForest Kelly is smiling. He's not smiling in the one in Winfield's book. In fact, he's looking straight at the camera and probably thinking, "Man, I wish I was anywhere else but here." But meanwhile, Jimmy Doohan,
mhm,
the engineer, is fascinated, and of course, Gene Roddenberry is front and center next to the NASA meatball. And if you look really close, that experimental aircraft that they are standing in front of is the HL-10, which flew multiple times to test basically wingless flight uh,
mm,
spacecraft at the time. And that's all in the hangar out at Dryden. And then the tall gentleman on the left, I don't know who he is. I've got some other shots in the sequence of photos that were taken that I found, where I see his face, but I have not been able to track down. I'm sure he was
mhm.
someone up there because he's wearing a suit. Most likely their host or whatever, for when they visited this facility in April of
Sure.
1960s.
Somebody in PR or public relations or liaison or something, celebrity, whoever was the guy stuck with giving tours to the celebrity guest visitors or whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But that photo captures, in
Let's see if I
essence,
can just do this. Yeah, there we go.
encapsulates what I'm talking about, because it includes NASA. It was originally, of
Mhm.
course, in Winfield's book, and then there were other photos in that sequence too that will be included in the book that I will share, and then the story, of course, of why they were there.
Yeah. Well, you sent me a couple of other, let me see, a couple of other images here. Now this is kind of like a compilation. Boom. So there's your cover.
Hmm.
I and I don't know if yeah. So I mentioned the 55, which I loved. I love I'd never seen the photo of talking about the Enterprise model kit on its 50th anniversary. The picture you got of Dee and Carolyn Kelly, and he's got the model kit like the pieces in the
On
instruction
the
sheet.
floor with his wife. Yeah.
Yeah, on the floor with that's just I just love that. I was like, oh my god, I'd never seen that until you dug it out. Maybe I couldn't. Yeah.
It's one that's, in fact, I've been trying to find the source. It most likely was a publicity shot, maybe taken for AMT, but I haven't been able to find the original of the source. It was to give credit where credit's due. It was found out on the web, and there's a digitized copy of it out there. I tried to clean it up as best as I could. It was originally in black and white. But it's wonderful because you can see it's clearly staged. They're on the floor, most likely in their house, and he's fuddling around trying to put this thing together. And of course, his wife is next to him there.
And they're all in show model. They're all in show model poses where you
right,
you
exactly. So
holding
it, so. It was posed, but I would love to know the full story on it, and I haven't been able to find it. So that's one of those things I'm hoping once the book gets out as well, that when people see some of these not so common images and some that are quite rare, that they might be able to come forward. The problem is a lot of these people are getting old, or are old if they're still alive.
Well, or they're long past, right?
Yeah, I've already encountered that when I've interviewed some of the individuals for my book. I interviewed Callum DeForest, who was in his.
I was so jealous. I saw that, and like what, a year, just a little over a year before he passed.
Yeah, and the folks don't know who he was. Callum DeForest started DeForest Research, and they were basically a script checker. They would go through the scripts, and they did all of the Star Trek ones to look for facts and look for names and clearance, so that the studios wouldn't be sued for using someone's name that in some fashion and just ruin their career or whatever. And Kellen went through all the scripts, so his influence, not only him but Joan Pierce, who worked for Kellum before she started her own script clearance firm. And she passed away as well. But his influence is quite heavy in the series also.
Yeah, he's mentioned, again, another name that's mentioned all through the making of that we all grew up with. And then I thought had passed, but was still around. But yes, he handed off to Joan. And then Joan did the same, did all that checking. And, in the years they didn't have a science advisor, they provided a lot of science tech. And this was, before I've had, oh my goodness, I've gone blank on his name. But one of their other employees, they both passed, but another gentleman that worked with them who's still with us and was a Portal 47 guest one month and talked about that whole world. But yeah, before the internet, you just had to have tons of all-purpose books, but you had to have like really specific books or be able to get to them. And they provided that service, and they'd get the memo on the draft scripts and the stories and drafts. And yeah, and Joan Pierce continued that. So anyway, I saw your picture with you and Kellen DeForest from like 2019, and I was like, oh my god,
I just interviewed him in the Christmas of 2019, and then sadly he passed away a year after that due to complications from COVID, but I was really fortunate to be able to see him. He's a wonderful gentleman. I've since corresponded with his family and talked with them as part of my interview process as well. But Kellen was extremely sharp, still, Yale educated historian, which is also an interesting part of my thesis in my book. Is you have Harvey Lynn trained as a engineer, and then you have Kellen DeForest trained as a historian. So both of these individuals, as you mentioned and readers know, are mentioned in the making of Star Trek throughout, had influence in the original series, and it was great. You have a historian as well as an engineer or scientist.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, this was the rare shot of the bird of prey that's I love, because you can see the tail finning, which I think Mike McMaster in his blueprints had that. They had access to this photo, but a lot of people widely didn't know the here.
Those were a couple of trims of all places I found on the internet. Most likely they were Lincoln Enterprises trims that that were circulating around, but I had never seen them before. They were pretty rare. And so, I'm scrutinizing them closely to look for any details that you can find. And, I've enlarged them. And those are a couple of the items that I offer as premiums for, different funding levels. But yeah, they're really cool. Hua Chang's amazing model. Very little is known about it. Very little, has been seen so that we can really grab images from it. But on those two shots, you can see kind of the pattern on the tail, as well as the trailing edge of the wings.
Right.
And then through Matt Cushman's excellent research, along with his brother Chris,
it's a little bigger.
Cushman brothers, the Cushman cutaways, they've found more information about how the bird of prey pattern was originally painted blue, which was intriguing. And they
Oh,
wrote
yeah.
about that in an issue of, I think it was Trek magazine or something, one of the publications, just a year or two ago.
And
And so that was enlightening as well.
and hypotheticalizing that that they had to change it from blue to orange because blue on blue screen would
Right.
bleed out.
Yeah,
But
with union painters involved, although they should have known.
Mhm.
Don't know the full story on that, but it would be interesting to, find more close-up shots to see some of the painting patterns and maybe if there were any photos taken of it
Yeah.
when it was blue. Real
Same reason that the first post silver suit for 7 of 9 was blue and only lasted 1 episode. They thought, "Well, how stupid is this?" They put her in astrometrics with all the blue screen and went, "Well, this is stupid."
And these are union folks working on this. It seems like
Yeah,
they
yeah,
would
yeah.
know, right?
Bob Bob Blackman, you should have known, right? So this was the fully gold. I know what this logo is. It's from the pilots, and it's
Yeah.
from the
Oh,
ship
yeah.
suit.
Yep.
I didn't
Yeah.
know if there was a special reason you had it included here.
Yeah, the globe and wreaths is mentioned in some of the correspondence that I found at the Roddenberry archives, which folks can access at UCLA. It's a wonderful resource. If
Mhm.
any of your followers out there have not had a chance to go out there, Mark Cushman uses that extensively in his epic series. These are the voyages, this 3-volume set. But it's a wonderful resource to use, and I've made multiple trips there, and I found the original artwork or a very clean silk screening of it. I think it was silk screen print that they used.
Mhm.
They just printed it on glossy paper for reference, and there were multiple copies of it. So I had that scanned. They will offer scan services and everything for images for a fee, and then reproduce that here because it was the cleanest original artwork that I could see from that emblem. And then, of course, finding the documentation and the correspondence and the memos that Gene had, because he was
Right.
considering, using that as the design or variations of it. This was, early on when they were trying to look for some kind of identity for the series, for the crew, and this was one of them that was being considered. So, that's the one you see on the cups, you see it on clipboards, you see it on the
Well, I
suit.
was thinking about the pockets of the
Yeah,
coverall. Boyd
yeah,
has it, and
it's
yeah.
there everywhere. And so, historically, I had to include that as well so people could see copies of that. And we have available of it stickers, printed up on clear stickers. So
Oh, okay.
people can apply these to, if you can find some of those old metal clipboards, you can stick it on there. It's about the right size. It's a little bit too big for the cups, but I have seen some people take the classic styrofoam cups, which were painted or colored gray with that little black
Right.
trim around there, and then apply this very carefully. It's a little oversized for that, but yeah, it's
Just
still the
yeah.
image.
Just scan it down a little bit and put it on
Right.
your own clear backing. Come
Yeah,
on.
make your own.
My God. Yeah. People whip out incredible CG models now and incredible cosplays. I think hopefully they can shrink down a sticker and all that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about so this is a mock-up. How is this what you're
Right. We wanted to
yeah.
put a mock-up of the book in place because we wanted to show people, that it is a book when we're referencing it for some of the different levels. So it's not set in stone as far as the finish, what the finish cover will look like, the hardcover. But I do have a contract in place with the publisher. I have to turn everything over this fall. I've been working on it for the past year as far as writing the book. And then once it gets in the hands of the publisher, I'm pretty sure it won't be out this year unless they're super, super fast. It'll most likely be out next year, the finished book. But it will be hardbound. It will be probably around 300 and some pages in length. It'll have a couple of photo insert sections that will have photographs in it. And so we just kind of staged a tentative cover to show it as what it looks like. The little Trek logo that you see in the lower
I was
left-hand
going to ask you
corner.
about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a fun one because that's actually done by George White, who was an artist. And I ran across that, maybe 4 or 5 years ago on the internet. And originally it said NASA in there. And I really love the NASA, logo that was in there because it's the old meatball, the NASA worm or meatball that you see in the black and white photo, the original emblem of NASA.
Uh-huh.
And then it's It's a mashup of Star Trek, of course, the original series. Although he's done one also, the original artist with the refit Enterprise, swooping off as well. And I said, could you pop in the classic one in there, because that's what I focused on.
Do that.
So he
Yeah, do
replaced that.
And people retconning that the red here is the Delta.
Yeah,
is the Delta that turns into the Starfleet Delta. Mike and Doug have kind of played with that.
Yeah,
angle.
and I wanted to keep it with NASA because of the NASA connections, and I actually approached NASA and asked for permissions to use that, and they said no. I'm afraid it's too similar, to NASA. These people might confuse it, with the actual agency and everything, and I understand that. So I went back and had Carl Tate, who's worked with me tremendously, and is a graphic designer on the book as well. And he went back with George's permission, and we tweaked it a little bit to replace NASA with Trek, but Trek is in the font of NASA, the logo for the words for NASA. And then we tweaked the stars a little bit, worked on the vector, the orbit, so that kind of did the For All Mankind thing, which is there. I don't know if you've seen For All Mankind, but it's another series on. Which is really nice, where they have NASA emblems, the NASA worm, the red worm, but they've tweaked it a little bit, courtesy of Mike Akuda, so that it doesn't quite look, exactly the same. But we've done the same thing with that.
Well, it's so future projected that they immediately leave our current times behind anyway. So it's all. That
little icon kind of encapsulates, the connection with NASA, the connection with Star Trek. And it makes it a little, to distill down, what I'm doing in a single graphic. If I wanted to do a patch or a sticker or something like that to help promote the book easily, that little graphic kind of says it all. So that's what we did with that, and that's offered as kind of a premium in our Kickstarter as well. We have a little vinyl sticker that we produce on that.
Let me see. Well, let me
that picture of me in the back there, some of your readers or followers most likely have taken the Paramount tour. I did that in 2019. I did a lot of my research in 2019. It was almost as if some little spirit or ghost, or maybe the ghost of Gene Roddenberry, said, get all of your work done in 2019 because 2020 is going to be really bad.
Not a big year for research, right?
Yeah, I traveled all over the place.
Or live research, anyway.
Yeah, I did a lot of research, and so in the Christmas of 2019, December 29th, which was like my third trip, I think, to the LA area or whatever, because I have relatives out there. I went and did the Paramount tour, and folks can do it. They have a couple different levels, but it's a really nice tour, and they take you, to the different sound stages, and then our host said, "Hey, what are you interested in?" Because they were really small groups, and I said, "Well, I'm interested in Star Trek, the original series." And he says, "Well, let me take you to stage 31, which was originally stage 9 and 10, 10 and 11,
9 and 10, yes.
9 and 10, yeah, the two sound stages that they used for the original series." And so he took me over there. We couldn't go inside, but there's these plaques that are really nice, and they have those on the sound stages of all of them that Paramount put up that list all of the films and television shows that were filmed in there. And so and he took my picture next to it, so that was perfect.
And those have just been up since the Viacom divorce, but when the studio changed over and the new attitude came in about they had discouraged, they only did tours grudgingly in the old days, which basically was all the original, like the Berman era and before. But when tourism became a thing, they actually were snooty about it and tried to distance themselves. Like they always would point to Universal. We're a working studio, not a theme park, And there were little now that totally ignores the fact that Warner Brothers had not only had an active museum, but it had like a real professional curator who curated their archives, and they took it seriously. As Paramount had an archivist, but they didn't. It fell by the wayside a lot, and there was nothing really. They'd made attempts to have public facilities, but that all changed with the new administration. So these plaques went up at all the stages because Warner's was doing that. And it was kind of like, oh, well, we need to do that too. But also they curate, they have a museum now. It's something as simple as bringing including Star Trek from the Kelvin movies, but bringing props and set pieces and graphics over. And they have a little museum now that they can dump tours into, but they totally beefed up the tour situation. So, good on you for experiencing. I mean, I offer that as an option on the tours that I do as a stop and, give my own thing. But
Cool.
They've totally beefed up what you can do now, and they had some things wrong on they got the whole Desilu numbers, later Paramount numbers, confused, and they had like the normal stage 9 where Next Gen and DS9 and Voyager were. They had that stage 9 listed with the original series, and I was like, okay, someone needs to like double check, because stage 9 is over in the 30s over there, like where you are here.
Yeah.
Because they renumbered the stages when they added the Desilu stages in. But anyway, we're in the weeds here. But yeah, you're right. I'm so glad you got out, and that's when you talked to Kellum DeForest, you said.
Right. That same time in December is when I went out and visited him and interviewed him, and had a chance to get his experiences. And it's funny, he had a copy of Star Trek, Inside Star Trek. The book that Justman and Solo put out in the late 90s, I think it was.
Yeah, 96. Yeah.
Which, has some issues, but it's a really good launching point for me as far as some of the research. There's some things in there that you can use to start your research. I wouldn't quote a lot of it verbatim because it does have some issues, but
especially from Herb Solo. But yes.
Yeah, it's a good. How should we say? Memories get a little fuzzy over years.
A little. Well, there's a little bit of feather nesting.
Yeah.
I actually met Bob Justman for the first time when I was working on the Next Generation Companion in like 15 nanoseconds. It felt like I had to get it done quickly, and he had already. We sat down and did this. I mean, I met him and we sat and talked for 4 hours of tape, and then we went back and he printed out memos that he had done from Next Gen. Right, still had those, but early, 1987 era, 86. But I said something about, why aren't you doing a book? And he said, oh, well, I've tried to sell a book, but they want me to write the whole thing because it's Star Trek and it's licensed. It's like, he's thinking it would be like normal book world. And he said, well, they want me to write the whole thing before they tell me whether they'll pay me for it or not, which I totally get.
Yeah.
And I was learning that was the licensing world. Like, it's Star Trek. It's going to sell 1 million copies. If it could be crap and you're going to sell 1 million copies. So, and we'll pay you 27 cents a copy for it, or something ridiculous. But I thought, but I'm thinking, well, this is, he's one of your guiding lights and voices. How insufferably rude to do that. So I felt bad about it. But then here comes, 2 or 3 years later, 4 or 5 years later, and I hear the news that, well, he's co-partnered with Herb. And the whole thing about, I didn't mean to get off on this, but the whole thing about, how Herb helped Gene, who was not a salesman, and how Herb basically did get, if you give him any kudos, he got Star Trek on the air. He was the salesman. He slicked his way past all the, he got him to Desilu, and then got him through the LA NBC people and the New York NBC people, all those names, and got it sold. And he talks about that. But but it's him talking about, well, we just did this and I just pushed. But to stand back and go, my God, like Gene was the mumbly, slovenly kind of, not the big pushy salesman. And it's Herb that got it over the finish line and got it sold. And when you think about that, you totally get what we were just saying about, well, you know what, here's, he's going to sell himself basically. But on the other hand, he's the one that got Bob's memories into book form and sold, because they basically co-write the book. But I know it's Herb Solo that sold that book as well.
Yeah.
He also sold, they did an art book for the original series that now a lot of people don't really remember, but it's out. It's the first time they did an art book on the original series. But he did a deal and got that out there and got Bob on. So when I read the Inside Star Trek book now, and I know that Herb is kind of feathering his nest a little bit there, it's at least got Bob's, and Bob's off on a couple of things too, but I totally trust the machine mind of Bob Justman.
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying.
Yeah, Bob Justman, I would love to have met him. He's one of the individuals, along with Gene Kuhn, that if I could go back in time, a little time machine or whatever, I would really love to speak with them, in person and talk with them. Gene Kuhn especially is one of the, people that we know so much about, as far as his influence on Star Trek, but know so very little about the the person himself. And I'm hoping through my Kickstarter, because one of my goals is to fund some additional research in archives, is to fund a trip to University of Wyoming, which is where the Gene L. Kuhn papers are. And you might say, how in the world did they end up in a state that has fewer population than most cities? It's amazing. How how did all this stuff come out here?
Hmm.
And if you just Google their American Heritage Center that they have there, they have an amazing collection, not only of Kuhn's papers, but Samuel Peebles,
And
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 uh,
repeat where that is again.
Peebles.
No, I mean the collection.
Oh, the collection. It's basically at the American Heritage Center at the University of Wyoming. They have this
Hmm.
huge collection that I think is one of these diamonds in a rough. Because I've spoken to some others too, and they said, "What? There's a collection out there." And I first ran across it while doing research in Variety, in old back issues of Variety magazine, which has a lot of good information. And there was some articles in the 1960s and 70s about how they were quite aggressive in gathering collections from old Hollywood individuals, people that had passed on or were
Right.
in their last days, and they were looking to get rid of their paper. And so they acquired a considerable number of collections, and they got the Forrest Ackerman collections, not the artifacts, but the paper,
Right.
pictures and documents and magazines and things that
The
he worked
Acker
on at
Mansion.
the
Yeah.
time. So,
Well,
but the
see,
T.L. Kuhn
it takes
material.
as Kirk or Edith Keeler once said, it only takes one person with a vision,
Hmm.
or maybe Mirror Spock, but way before a lot of people were still throwing stuff away. The studios were the worst. Like, for all the fans who dared to go dumpster dive or steal stuff, who were thieves, until the last 20 years, the studios, it was just trash. And it was it's like the Postal Service. If there were errors in, like, the biplane error, I'm going to get weird here, but you brought it out of me, Glenn. But the Postal Services, the old post office's attitude, if there was a misprint after the inverted Jenny biplane stamp became a collector's item, they had this attitude that if there was a mistake in the printing, they wanted it destroyed because they didn't want to create instant collectibles that way from a
Yeah.
mistake,
Yeah.
which is insane. And
Right.
the studios, not exactly, but still the same attitude. It was like, well, this stuff shouldn't become collectible. None of this should become elitist or collectible. It's all garbage and it's our property and we're done with it. And that attitude is it's like, what? So I remember Richard Arnold telling me the day he heard glass crashing massively, and he ran out in the alley at the lot at Paramount, and they were cleaning out old glass matte paintings, including some of and they were like upstairs stored, and they were just throwing them out a window and letting them crash into a dumpster.
Yeah.
And they were so this like little Nazi attitude about, it's almost like if we're not going to use it, nobody can have it. Ha ha ha. And
well, it's sad that attitude even prevails to some degree today. You probably recall Warner Brothers recently with their movie posters. Stuff it boggles the mind on some of the heritage that's still,
I mean, thankfully a lot of that's changed, but I was saying with the studio attitude at Paramount was, we have to put up with tourists. Like, they're going to come, we have to put up with them.
Right.
And I mean, that's all. A lot of this has changed in the last 10, 15. For one thing, it's like everybody needs revenue. Like,
right.
Nothing else. Just go make money off the stuff, or get the PR out of donating it, if not auctioning it and selling it, or whatever. Anyway, I want to make sure and let people. I think I rarely do this, but I'm going to try. I want to let people see your Kickstarter here. And make sure and put. I want to take some questions. I think we got a few questions in the chat. I'm going to backtrack, but let me put. Oh, Christoph just beat me to it. That's funny. I'd had it pegged to run it. So it looks like you're a little behind your goal, but it's popped up. I mean, I don't want to take all the credit here, but the last 24, 38 hours or something, I think it's edged up a little bit in the last day. So maybe we'll get some more attention. And
I hope I even put I even put a new funding level out there. I call it the dilithium level because there's a couple of items that I have in my collection, and I'm really trying to gather funds to try to get the book going. And so if you look at the dilithium level, you will see a original drawing of the Enterprise that Matt Jeffries did, one of the conceptual versions for the original series. Now it is.
Let me just say real quick. Here's you were talking about making an effort to get faces for the names.
Yep.
And
all those individuals I talk about in the book. There's from left to right. I don't know if you can see it, but that's Kellum DeForest in his main library on the set of Paramount Studios, actually. You know, because that was one of the, he got free rent by being able to essentially take over the old RKO archives that they had there, and so that's him there in that original archive. That's Joan Pierce to the right, woman, and that's Fred Durant III next to her, who has a critical role in the Smithsonian's contribution to the influence of Star Trek.
And it was involved with getting the filming model,
and
all the other Star Trek, and the 7 and the
this story is fascinating. I don't want to reveal all of it, but that the connection with the Smithsonian to the original series, if people are wondering how did the 11-foot miniature get there and who was responsible for that, that's all covered in my book in depth of how they actually acquired that and things that occurred prior to that, because they didn't actually get that until 1974 when nobody wanted it. When Paramount's like, sure, Star Trek, what's that? I mean, there was a cartoon that's out around that time, but and my kids watch it in syndication, but it's no asset that's currently active. So sure.
When we had the Communicator magazine, we had the guy who facilitated this. Do you know the story about the Enterprise model fresh from cancellation when no one cared about anything? It was all radioactive, and like if you touch it, it'll lose money. That was the attitude.
Yeah.
But they had in Arizona, either at the University of Arizona, Arizona State, had a display. They actually borrowed and paid for the shipping for the 11-foot model and some other pieces to be on display, for the public. And it was this is like 1970.
Yeah, it wasn't in Arizona. Yeah, that wasn't in Arizona. That was actually at a community college in outside of San Francisco, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't in Arizona.
I carried it wrong. Well, thank you then for the correction.
No, that's fine. It's one of those things I've researched, for the book. But yeah, that's the one where you've probably seen some pictures where it's kind of at a jutted at an angle, and they've got it lit. And they brought
up about how the turnover at the studio and how it was not on anybody's priority list. How he basically had to ask how to send it back, and they almost were like, "Oh, we don't care. You
can keep it." That's right.
Yeah, but that's that attitude, It's like people don't. Yeah.
I'll put it next to my 3-foot Enterprise.
yeah. But anyway,
those are individuals that are all covered in my book.
Right. Where's Harvey? Where's Harvey Lynn?
Harvey Lynn is the one at the bottom with the horn rim glasses and the Air Force uniform in the far right.
There we go.
Yeah,
thank you. I never even thought to think that I didn't know what Harvey Lynn looked like.
Yep. Well, there aren't really any photos out there. There is one photo.
Harvey Lynn. Yeah.
Yeah. There is one photo that got me started. It was in the Vault Blu-ray that came out a number of years ago. The Star Trek Vault Blu-ray. That in the extra materials there is a Harvey Lynn that's pictured there, but it turned out that that's his son. He had 2 sons. There was Dennis and then Harvey P. Lynn III. And the one that's pictured, he's kind of curly hair in the Blu-ray is his son, but they noted as being Harvey Lynn from Star Trek, but it's not him.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So yeah, those are just some of the folks
and that this is Steve Poe here, Steve Whitfield.
Yep, that's right. That's Stephen Poe, and then some of the other individuals. Let me see here.
Who's the woman here?
Oh, that's Barbara Moran. She worked as the assistant to the director of the Goddard Space Flight Center. And she was instrumental in getting Leonard Nimoy to come and speak or come to attend the National Space Club's annual Goddard Memorial Dinner in 1967. And that launched a whole series of events, which are covered in my book, that got Star Trek into the Smithsonian. It was through her efforts, really, that started this whole process that eventually wound up 7 years later getting the Enterprise, the 11-foot Enterprise into the Smithsonian.
I should. I'm gonna back off. Well, you know what? I was gonna do this originally to show the perks, and we got off in the weeds here. But I love it. This is why what you're doing is amazing, Glenn, and this is why I'm trying to boost it. But here's you were talking about the perk levels. So you've got really simple really simples.
Yep, I've got stickers. I've got the AMT stickers that we did, the Watchang prints, the signed copies of the book, the kind of the everything, you know, all together. We do have some copies of Matt Cushman's. I think that was earlier cutaways from the Ships of the Line calendars. Your followers, I'm sure, are familiar with that. The 2020 calendar, he did the center spread for the Daedalus class starship, and the cutaway of that, the one with the big ball, you know, on the front.
Right.
And he's signed copies of that, so we will make copies of that available. And then that last one is for someone.
When you just added for a big splash.
Yeah, that is one of the early renderings of the Enterprise that Matt Jeffries did in pen and ink. There were a whole series of these, and this is one from my collection that I'm putting up to help fund the book that I purchased from Profiles in History back in 2001 when they auctioned that off when Matt was still alive. He was getting rid of a lot of
his collections,
and you know, the bridge. Remember the cardboard bridge cutout? And he and Bob Justman too was involved in that, and Herb Solo also. They started bringing out a bunch of their personal archives and making them available.
Yes.
Well, that's the upside down Enterprise, which is kind of interesting. You know, you'll see some of those in Making of Star Trek. I think there's one of them.
I was going to say this series of these sketches is there.
And this is the one, of course, where the networks, and a lot of them I'm familiar with Star Trek, printed.
TV9 did it all
remember that? So Matt Jeffries was thinking of that at one time, but it just doesn't look right. It just doesn't quite have the balance as the iconic image that we all know and love that resulted when it's flipped over.
Well, there's and here's the rest of your here's some of your stickers and pieces and some of the artwork that we've shared here. So anyway, there you go, and hopefully we'll boost some signal. You want to jump in and let me undo this, and we'll come back. You want to look at some? I think there's some questions here from the chat. If you're up for that,
sure.
I will curate here. Let me see. I saw at least one too. Here's one from.
There's the one at Zirconic. What did NASA people think about?
Let me jump back to this one. Do you know, did Gene Roddenberry ever try to get any astronauts on Star Trek?
Yes.
I know we have retired ones on Next Generation because Mae Jemison was famously in a Star Trek. But
no, he did. Gene Roddenberry and the original series, again, focusing on the original series, actually wanted to get Alan Shepard to appear on Star Trek. And I have all the documentation for that appears in the book. He was going to be on the show as not a regular occurring character, but as an appearance. And they went so far, and this is one of the things I actually found when I was at NASA that I'm glad you mentioned it, because it was one of those things that really, I mean, I'm just sitting up in my chair and say, what the, Alan Shepard, the first American to go into space, the second person in the world to go out there, was going to be on Star Trek, and they were actually seriously
as a background dialogue or a civilian or what on some planet, or I said as a background crew, as some civilian on some planet, or
I think he was just going to be as a guest appearance, probably on one or two episodes. One, definitely, and of course he was a civil servant at that time still, and so he couldn't take any payment, because obviously this was before. He walked on the moon in Apollo 14. So he was still he was still on the payroll. Our tax dollars were paying him. So he couldn't take any money. But the agreement was.
Not that.
It went so far.
Hit on the budget. Poor Star Trek. Right.
It went so far as to say, I'll appear in exchange for you doing a spot for my favorite charity. And so there was, this exchange going back and forth. And for some reason, it just didn't materialize. We had to wait until Enterprise appears then you see Alan Shepard in the, introductory credits and everything. But they didn't stop there. They also went after Scott Carpenter. Gordon Cooper. I think it was Gordon Cooper that they tried to get also. So they wanted a real astronaut. They wanted an NASA astronaut, and that really surprised me. Alan Shepard turned it down, and so they went after another one. So there's some correspondence about trying to get this other person, Cooper on there as well, and then that didn't materialize also. So imagine, if you will, if we had a real astronaut appear in one of our 79 episodes of Star
Even
Trek.
just the background, whether they get to do like a Mr. Leslie thing and say, good morning, sir, or something,
Right,
or I,
right.
sir, do an I, sir, from the helm or whatever, it'd be
So,
amazing.
yeah, that was something that again, the NASA connection, was really amazing. And when I was the historian at the Johnson Space Center, I had access, to all the archives, including, all the different field centers, and then NARA as well. So there's a lot of documents that would go to the different regional facilities for
That's
the
the
National
National
Archives.
Archives.
Yeah, the National Archives, and
Everybody says NARA now, and it kind of like wipes.
yeah, National Archives and Records Administration.
Yes.
Another acronym that like NASA. So, I was able to dig through, and of course had internet access, but there's still a lot of stuff, you just had to go and find paper.
Well, I'm going to go on and get another question out, but you mentioned Scott Carpenter. So one thing, my wheels are turning here. We've got a letter at the Roddenberry files where after he was, post his, because he was only in for a year or two. He left right after Mercury ended and wasn't around even for Gemini. But he had his own nonprofits, right? And I think he was getting into the undersea world and exploring that.
Yeah, he was still working. Yeah,
and we have a letter. There's a letter from Scott Carpenter inviting Gene to speak at his or do something for his nonprofit. And we don't have a reply back, but we have the the query letter.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, all the different connections that there are to the original series, and it wasn't just NASA as well. The other things that I found was the aerospace community in general, and their support for NASA. I brought along a copy here. I think I can hold it up all right.
Sure.
But this is a.
Let me make you. Oh yeah.
This is a copy of
it's reading backwards, but that's fine.
Yeah, but the important thing is this this image here. Your followers will probably notice there's some very familiarity here. But this was from a 1960 proceedings that we had on file at the archives, or in the NASA archives, and this was one of the items that got me going as well. When I saw that artwork on there, I said, wait a minute, what's the connection here? In 1960, when that was published, that certainly would be a time when, Gene Roddenberry and Matt Jeffries and others would be able to get access to this. And then, of course, the models that they used were models from Douglas aircraft. Richard Dayton talks about that in his book, Finding the Enterprise, the one by his daughter.
Model builder for regional series.
Bill Dayton puts out.
Contractor.
Yeah, so there's these discarded or excess models of the Enterprise, or of the K7, that they acquired and used them for, of course, the K7. So, there was another connection there. How did you find that? Find those materials.
So. Well, just so we can, and because I want to thank him, I forgot to go back to this, but it's SCE to Ox, which I don't know why I couldn't come. Yeah, I enjoy saying CVS to Ox, which
there we go. Yeah.
But and CSE is the acronym of a coaching group I was with for a long time, so I do that. Let me see if there's so yes, Zirconic, we got you answered.
There's one from Dina Weibel.
I was going to say, hey Scott, thank you for donating, and maybe we can get a few more your way. I think I saw your total edge up maybe 1,000 or something in the last 24 hours. So I don't know. You're watching it. Let me see. This is what I thought too. We're talking about the Dee and Carolyn Kelly photo. Scott says Dee seems the least likely of the actors to be playing with a spaceship model kit, which is what makes it fun. So
yeah, I'm a doctor, not a model builder.
There you go. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, that AMT connection too, I cover that heavily in the book. My post that you mentioned in one of your episodes, where I'm talking about the history of the 55th anniversary of Star Trek, the first Enterprise model, and then this year being the 55th anniversary of the Klingon ship. The AMT connection is really important as well, because that model influenced a lot of individuals, especially the Enterprise. I really hit a nerve as far as affection for
Sure.
Star Trek when talking about the original AMT Enterprise, because so many people remember that model fondly back in the days when there was very little to nurture our interest, to support
There
our
were very
interest.
little NASA models. I mean,
Yeah.
Mercury and Gemini capsules were
Yeah.
brand new and barely out there
So,
at that same time. Yeah.
So in spite of all of its faults, warts and all, it still was beloved by so many fans. And being from Michigan, an AMT aluminum model toy company being based in Troy, Michigan, and as a historian, I had a natural draw to that connection, and its contributions to Star Trek. So I talk quite a bit about the Stephen Poe making a Star Trek, which I still have my copy all tattered. It's just disintegrated.
Yeah.
This is my original copy. I have it in a plastic bag here. It just falls apart.
Well, I was lucky enough. You're talking about meeting people, so I'll take your envy on Bob Justman. I'll envy you on Kellum DeForest, but it's up here on my shelf somewhere. I've put it away. Anyway, I was on the lot and we were in LA when they were looking for suddenly wanting to boost the publishing. They took so long not trusting the sales numbers. And then when my book and when the tech manual took off, then they were suddenly running around trying to find titles, and they bought Herb's book with Bob finally. But they brought Stephen Poe back, like, oh, let's take a sentimental favorite. And he did a Voyager book, which is not nearly as successful. Right. And it brought, but Stephen writes in a way, like there's never an index in his books, and they're all over the map as far as chronology. And it just drives me crazy to read it. But it was awesome to meet this guy who had talk about influencing. His book, influenced so many people, and it was in print for 30 years. I mean, it's still off and on in print, but getting him to autograph a copy and meet him was a big
oh yeah,
yes. But that book was, you're talking about the Enterprise model. It was the same,
right?
There was nothing. There was so little to get that those things, and then they were so deep and foundational on top of being, there was nothing. It was like having a 3-channel universe versus 500 cable channels.
Oh,
your attention was focused. Everybody grew up with it.
Right. To have the model, the Enterprise model come out in 1967, and then the next year to have the making of Star Trek, which the first printing came out in September 1968, which was just basically 1 month before the Klingon ship came out. Yeah. And see then, the Klingon ship model appear on the store shelves when fans had no idea what it looked like, because the Star Trek hadn't been out yet.
That's the jiggery of.
And then when it does come out, and then when it does come out, it's populated by Romulans.
Right.
So everyone is wondering what the heck. Although I do want to mention one really fun thing, and some of your followers might follow this, but there was a publication called Inside Star Trek.
Yes.
That was put out by Lincoln Enterprises. It was kind of a fanzine, or early fanzine that was produced.
It was the official newsletter.
Right.
And Susan was running it, or
she eventually picked it up later. But in the days in 67, 68, when it first came out, it was still cut, it was put out during, when the series was still being filmed. And so they would get on set and do these articles. So if you ever get a chance to get copies of those or find them on the internet, they're really interesting. But one of the ones that I found, I would pull it out here, but it was the issue about the Klingon ship. And there was a drawing of the Klingon ship on the cover of this, very crude fanzine. It's in pulp print. How back in the day, remember the Lincoln Enterprises catalogs? They were printed later on pulp print. I think they were printed in bleach print, but they're very crude. They're just designed to get the information out and then disintegrate. And so this publication came out, and people are seeing this ship on there called the Klingon ship, and then inside of it, DC Fontana writes about it. She writes a review about it. And, she's saying the kit's going to be coming out, and she's describing it and how Matt Jeffries, worked on it, and that it was mapped, pantographed from the original studio model. So just, hyping it up fantastic, because it's the most accurate kit, that the early AMT Star Trek line produced. It was a wonderful, wonderful kit. But that drawing that was on the cover inside Enterprise, there's a little signature at the bottom. It says Andy Probert. Andy Probert did that drawing.
Wow.
And Andy Probert, a very young Andy Probert at that time, he worked for Lincoln Enterprise. Greg Jean, of course, worked for Lincoln Enterprises as well. And so there's this Andy Probert connection, to having us see some of these first images of the Klingon ship. So you have the inside
I
Star
didn't
Trek.
realize that.
They could get
Yeah,
access to that. The kit comes out. Then you have the making of Star Trek, and then finally Enterprise incidents come out, and then there's this whole uproar from fans saying, "Wait a minute, why isn't Hua Chang's ship on there, and we have a Klingon ship?" And then DC Fontana comes back later and she says, "Well, because we're trying to promote the model kit, not explaining the politics about how Hua Chang's ship disappeared."
Right. It was a simpler time. It was a less savvy time there.
Right.
But they were sincerely there. I do want to give a shout out here to my friend Dr. Dave, who works in space and planetary science at Arizona State. He's a professor, works on a lot of planetary missions. Their unit works with NASA a lot. But you've got, and I knew this would, he's among the many who would be happy to jump in and just did there. So shouting out him. We had the link up. I'm looking back in the chat here. Sean, you're absolutely right. Even into the 90s, some things were kept. They kept some pieces. Like I know they kept the big red gears from not from the station, the airlock gears, I call them. Some pieces were, but so much stuff was repeated. They just trashed because they look at it as a storage issue. They're having to pay for the storage. So what makes sense to, if they can take set pieces, because a lot of things famously got reused. The Defiant set, I remember when Voyager was happening, outlasted DS9 by 2 years, and they were retaking Defiant set pieces, which could have been another Starfleet ship, but it was so compact that they were using them for alien ships and repainting. But people would say, "Oh, these are parts of the old Defiant bridge," and you're kind of like, okay, so it's not. You'd have to repaint it if you ever wanted to bring it back. But anyway, it's not the mentality. But yeah, that whole here's another one from our friend Zirconic. What did NASA people think about Star Trek? Well, I know this one. Were they fans, and did Gene Roddenberry ever try to get any well, we said this. He's repeating his question, but he's added to it here from earlier. Yeah.
No, NASA, they embrace the show wholeheartedly. And of course, Gene Roddenberry takes advantage of that and uses that because he talks about a lot of the people that work in the aerospace industry and NASA in general, support Star Trek. And of course, NASA internally did as well. And I find a lot of documentation where between Roddenberry and NASA representatives, and even Jim Webb, who was the director, the administrator of NASA at the time, supporting
before he built a space telescope.
Yeah, before he built a space telescope, when they were still trying to, get us to the moon and so forth, back in the good old days. So yeah, NASA was very, and people that followed NASA and worked at NASA, this was just an amazing show because again, it treated science fiction seriously. It was a believable universe, not only in the hardware but in the mass of the ship. This was the first time you got to realize many people, seeing a ship that was so massive, and time again, the references where you light up the windows, and Roddenberry wants to get a sense of scale on this thing where there isn't just one or two people zipping around like in the old serials from Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, but you have a sizable ship like an aircraft carrier that's flying around in space. And that was all new stuff.
Well, yeah, it was not only, both of these, I always have talked for years about the mutual love affair between NASA and Star Trek and the greater aerospace industry, because in the 60s, they're both dying for eyeballs. They're both dying for support.
Right.
The fact that they can all be in the club together and mutually support each other. Each on their own. One's a government entity. One is a television entertainment property. One is really got to be profit motive and needs numbers, but the political entity needs numbers too. They got to get their funding every year in Congress. They got to depend on popular support. And maybe someday, the Kennedy-esque get to the moon won't always be there. And sometimes there's hiccups and sometimes there's controversies, and they need public support to keep the, no bucks, no Buck Rogers, to keep that going.
Right.
And so it's always been fascinating, but even aside from the commercial aspects, at the core, what drove Gene to push this and for other people to get on board with him is the same thing that's driving everybody who makes, I'll say, science their career, or something at heart, much less NASA itself, is is that yearn and the fact that they can mutually support each other and find, no, you're my hero. No, you're my hero. No, you're my. But they also know that each other is driving public, minds and hearts. Hearts and minds, I think, is the phrase. And anyway, it's a fascinating. What's the symbiotic? What's the trill? That symbiosis is really fascinating, and that's what. And I guess I'm preaching to the choir here. That's what your book is about.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, I just noticed one of the messages here, and I know the poster mentioned that the Klingon ship on the inside Star Trek #2 is actually drawn by Greg Jean, and that's correct. Greg Jean and Andy Probert did some drawings as well, but they kind of
just lost, by the way.
Yeah, both of them contributed in that publication. Mike Akuta's mentioned in the publication as well. He's very young, and he writes a letter, and it's published in Inside Star Trek, and it's really, really cool to see, that these iconic individuals that later on went and shaped Star Trek as a follow-on were chronicled in some of these early publications.
Okay, so Dina or Deanna is saying, is this somebody you know, maybe? What is astrostomatology? Glenn will know this.
Yeah, Dina's my wife.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Astrostomatology. I'm glad you asked that. Yeah, one of the characters, one of the individuals that I cover in my book is a gentleman by the name of Jack Hartley. And Jack Hartley worked for Brooks Aeromedical Laboratory in Texas. He was in the Air Force, and his specialty was he was a dentist. And he was working on how the issue about what if an astronaut has a toothache in space, okay? How do you take care of that? How do you respond to that? You can't just, take them to the dentist and, you would jeopardize the whole mission. So he worked on a small portable kit designed to basically remedy any issues that astronauts or, other crew members in space might have dealing with, with their teeth. And he followed Star Trek, and he liked Star Trek. He watched it regularly, and when the first episode premiered, the very next day he sent a telegraph to Gene Roddenberry telling him how much he enjoyed Star Trek. And that telegram, the original, can be found in the UCLA archives, the Gene Roddenberry papers. And when I ran across that, now, I was starting to see some documentation and others with the military connection. Because there was very much a military connection, to Star Trek as well. And so now I had some documentation that's showing individuals with the military being interested in Star Trek, and apparently Gene Roddenberry and others thinking enough of Jack Hartley's telegram to save it, to put it aside and say, hey, this is important. And that telegram and some portion of that was actually quoted in an ad that appeared in Variety in 1967 after Star Trek was renewed, shortly after Star Trek was renewed for a second season. And they were pushing for Emmy consideration, with Variety. He was one of the individuals quoted in their ad for Star Trek that appeared in Variety. And so I was really curious about who this person was. And, he had passed away, but his kids were still alive. And so I got to interview them and talk with them. And it turns out that he and Gene Roddenberry, well, I can't spill the beans too much because my book is in here, right? But you'll learn more about it in the book, the connection that he had and the influence that he had specifically with McCoy's medical pack, okay? His pouch and the design of it and the elements in that. So you'll have to follow that in my book.
My gosh, Glenn, tell me more. Are you kidding me? As a student and devotee and a research digger for years for McCoy's medical kit, because it never got,
Right. Well,
never got any attention. The more obscure the piece, the less attention it got.
Well, the wonderful thing too about being, a historian, academic, and researcher is there's many times there's wonderful things that happen. And in the Hartley story, that was interesting because I was able to, the family had all of his papers.
Oh, awesome.
And they went through a fire. There was a fire that they had, but a lot of the papers survived, including a skull, human skull that Hartley had that appeared on the Tonight Show. But that's another story because Hartley also appeared on television back in the 1960s.
Is all of this in the book?
But this is all in the book.
Okay. Well, as much as I'm enjoying this, we should move on, and I don't want you to give it all away. But yeah, I wasn't expecting.
But the short end of it is, I was able to put the family in touch with the National Dentistry Museum, which is housed at the University of Maryland. I didn't know that there was such a museum, but there's museums for everything, so I probably should know. And so I was able to put the family in touch with their collection specialist so that all of his papers could be donated to that museum. And so now they will be more accessible to other researchers so that they can, find more about Jack Hartley and his contributions to Star Trek using primary sources.
And well, did he? Okay, I don't want to. I started to say, did he contribute to anything else? Like, did he ever have any? Okay, that's enough. That's enough.
Yeah. No, his story is very interesting, and it's just one of those surprising ones that I stumbled across due to that telegram. Again, that telegram that was found in the Roddenberry papers. And again, that's one of the pleasures of researchers. Going through these archives, these stuffy old archives, looking through papers and everything, you start to make connections. And sometimes you run across things that no one has, encountered before. And it really is quite enjoyable when you do make those connections.
When you find a casting list for the role of Decker for Phase 2 or motion picture, and one of the names on it is Andrew Robinson, you're like, what? Andy Robinson? Read for Decker for the motion picture?
Well, that's like who was considered for, April and Pipe,
Oh yeah. But I mean,
series from,
the things you find in those dusty paper. That's why I always say, guys, dusty paper. History is more than dusty paper, but dusty paper is pretty amazing sometimes.
Yeah. There's a lot. There is a lot out there, and it's interesting because there's been so much published on Star Trek, and I've read a lot, and I've corresponded with others. There's a lot of people that know a tremendous amount, and it's one of those things. What new material are you bringing to the realm? And so that's one thing I'm really careful with on this book, because it's like, okay, this is something that hasn't been touched on before. And so I don't want to just rehash, stuff that's out there and put my own spin on it. This is all new material. And it's very well researched so that people will be able to find the stuff themselves. They won't be able to just take my word for it. They'll be able to actually trace the
source. Here's the
they can go back to the art.
No, I thank you, because that's me. It's like, there's so much out there. I don't want to pile on. I always try to find the new angle or the unexamined angle or whatever. And the fact that you're doing primary research and doing interviewing and finding dusty paper, that's so cool. So this Dina person has this says, what's the connection to I mean, I'm guessing maybe National Children's Dental Health Month.
Yeah, that's going back to Jack Hartley, because he promoted National Dental Children's Health Month, and he was on an episode of To Tell the Truth, and so which was filmed to help promote when they did National Children's Dental Health Month. They actually had a month devoted to that for a long time. The National Dentistry the association, National Dental Health Association. I think it went through a couple of different names over time, but their archives are actually in Chicago, and I went first to them, and then they referenced me to the museum on the East Coast. But Jack Hartley, if viewers want to do that, they can just Google that, because the YouTube video is out there of him showing off his little buddy kit, he called it, which was the little portable dental health kit that he designed for astronauts so that they could take into the
oh my gosh, okay,
in the 1960s. And you will look at it and it looks eerily familiar to something from Star Trek. It's interesting. Yeah,
I have to do that. No, I've recently stumbled into the rabbit hole of seeing how many To Tell the Truths are on YouTube. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So the fact that you just brought that up, I'm like, well, that doesn't surprise me, because there's, I think, the entire 40-year run of To Tell the Truth is.
Yeah, he was on the Tonight Show too, and with Johnny Carson, right around that same time, promoting the same event, because he was a spokesperson for that National Children's Dental Health Week, and that was when he brought out his human skull. And so you can imagine Johnny Carson with a human skull, how that went. And I've been trying.
Alas, poor Hartley. I knew him well. Yes.
Yes. I've been trying to find that segment of film, and I haven't had much luck. I know what episode it is. It's chronicled, it's registered and everything, but I actually haven't been able to find the video. But I would love to see the video, because he was very, very good in talking. You know, Jack Hartley, he had an ease and an ability to communicate quite well, and I think that's one reason why he was a spokesperson for that event with the Dental Association.
So let me hit a few. These comments are starting to get really interesting here. So Luke the Legend, hi Luke, and maybe you're new to Tuesdays Live. If you are, yay. If not, great. Maybe you were Luke the Lurker until today. Luke says, I have no idea who you are, but I look forward to your book. Well, that's the point. That is the point. You can always retcon the research, Luke, but getting here is has to be.
And that Luke the Legend, by the way, is our 14-year-old son who'll be 15 years old just later on. So
you're just manipulating the process here. That's what.
Hey, I know how to work the system, right?
Well, speaking of working the system, here's a suggestion. So Christoph is one of our big community folks in Portales. He's in Austria, so they're always coming in with the European viewpoint. He's talking about shipping. He's saying, have you thought of a pledge level with purely digital perks so that there's no postage?
No postage. Yeah, I know my publisher will do e-copies of the book, but I'm leaving it to them. So I haven't offered that to make that available as a pledge, because the details, I'm not sure what they are as far as making them accessible. As far as digital copies of pictures and images, you know, that's kind of that's a tricky thing, you know, to deal with as far as controlling the copies of it. The AMT decals that you have, are the little stickers there. I have permissions, you know, with Round 2, who has the AMT license now, to reproduce this as long as I give them out free. So it's like, okay, that you can support my book, but then I'll give you these free stickers in return. So it's still a free issue. So yeah, I hear that, but again, it's kind of difficult to do that, especially where I'm trying to. One of my goals of my Kickstarter campaign is to secure funds for licensing for some of these images that I will include in the book. And again, these aren't through Paramount. These would be in private archives, such as the UCLA collections, Smithsonian archives, and other archives, University of Wyoming, where they have these collections. And then, of course, they charge fees for reproducing them for publication.
So to repeat that, a chunk of your Kickstarter budget is for the licensing fees.
Right.
And again, and it's not even Paramount. It's other sources.
Right.
Sources, museums.
Right. Yeah.
People know. Well, Luke is coming clean here in a way, I guess. So, okay. Here's a question back from our curious Zirconic 9.
Right.
I have a feeling there was no private shooting at NASA facilities, or what was that?
Why
they completely made the fictional rocket base and didn't even mention, much less shoot. They had footage, but
I think he's thinking not of Operation Annihilate. That would be.
This is Assignment Earth.
Assignment Earth, right. So I was thinking of that because I actually talk about an Operation Annihilate in my book, and some of my followers might have seen my postings about the TRW space facility that is there, where they filmed Operation Annihilate. Yeah. And some of the things that I found and connections that I made with that. But let's go with the McKinley Air Base one. That's a good question, because I talk a lot about Assignment Earth in my book, because that episode had some of the most cooperation with NASA. That's evident in the original series. And the McKinley Air Force Base was one of the things. If you looked at some of the early script treatments and things like that, they actually mentioned NASA in the early script treatments. But because NASA did not want to make a direct connection where you mention NASA or any NASA facility in the script itself,
because it's a commercial enterprise.
They were a little nervous about that, and especially the way that the Saturn V was treated. in,
Oh yes.
in Assignment Earth, where it was the carrier of a nuclear weapon instead of a peaceful rocket that was designed to carry the astronauts
Yeah.
to the surface of the moon. That whole story is really, really interesting. How did they get that past the NASA censors, if you will, where they're using, Apollo 4 footage and
Which was brand new, right? That was very
yeah.
sharp and new, and it was
that
broadcast well.
episode, yeah, that episode, for many, that footage is the first time, that they've actually seen a lot of the footage of the Saturn V. Now, Apollo 4 did launch, prior to the episode, because you see the launch footage, and that footage switches from the Apollo 501, the test object, the test article that didn't take off, that had the markings on the upper stage that were different and unique. That was just the test vehicle that never flew, but it was used for fittings, to test the launch, the crawler, and making sure that it goes to the VAB and all the plug connections are correct. And then the Apollo 4 launch, which occurred in November, prior to the episode's airing, then of course they used that footage on board, including the fascinating footage of the staging, which is used over and over again. And of course, that whole story is fascinating, just from a NASA history side too, about the cameras, how they were recovered them, because these were film cameras that were used on the inner stages to film the separations of each stage, and then they fell back to Earth, and then landed in the ocean and were recovered with these little floats so that they could process the film, and then we could see that amazing.
Never stopped to think about that until I only realized a year or two ago that was from the unmanned, pre-7, that wasn't from a live mission. And then it's like, what was the technology, dummy? Those cameras, whatever the point of view, had
they couldn't feed them.
It's like the old Monty Python sketch where they're out doing something and someone says, wait a minute, who's he? And they go to the cameraman who's taking their shot and they say, yes, but wait a minute, who's filming us? And then it's like they keep going to the the next cameraman shooting the scene. It's hysterical.
Right.
But it's that point of view of the camera.
Right. But no, the McKinley
had to be recovered from the ocean splashdown, its own little recovery. It's
the change in the name from some NASA facility to Cape Canaveral, ideally, although you can see the maps are very, very similar. They were altered a little bit.
Well, I love how they went from one assassinated president to another.
Right. That's true.
They want to call it Lincoln, and I thought Garfield might be, so McKinley, there's only been one famous McKinley, so that's
right.
Yeah, I've really early on was like, oh, it's another dead president they're using for their fictitious launch base. Okay.
No, but that episode I covered a lot. I mean, even his ID cards that Gary Seven uses features the NSA and the National Security Agency, and
which is never at that time.
At that time,
hush, and no one mentioned.
Everyone, was like, what? So this is one of the early, if not the first, appearances on television of the NSA or mention of it. That was a pretty hush-hush organization at the time. They were certainly around, but you didn't see them, shown on in some television shows. So that was quite interesting.
I really should start to wrap up. I love this. I started to say 30 minutes, and I should have known that between the depth of your research and writing and what you're sharing for the first time. But again, I want everybody to see it. So for one thing, before we got around to it, Zirconic came back a couple of messages later and did a mea culpa here and corrected himself.
Yep.
So okay, your Trek expert card is still back.
I goofed up on the drawing name, and this person goes, it happens. Everything kind of blurs, I'm looking right now at like 9 boxes of documents, that I've set aside, because I do a lot of course, research on the computer, but I also do print copies. So I have all this stuff sorted around because I'm very visual. I can remember visual things, names not so well, but visual things, I can see it. So that's how my brain works.
So Scott's, I'm still back in the chat. Scott put up the link to the earlier Trekland Tuesday live episode. We talked about the kit. I didn't know you at the time, and I was doing it on the run, and I couldn't reach out in time. But basically, that episode was repeating everything you'd been posting, and then I threw in some personal reflection and experience. But it was basically, the whole idea was like, have you seen this guy? He's talking about the model kit. You should all go, and that was before your before you were doing this Kickstarter.
Right.
But it sure paved the way for people to appreciate what you're doing.
Is, this book that I'm working on now, Inspired Enterprise, is my first book contract with my publisher. And then I have an option for up to 2 or 3 other books they have first option on to publish after that. And my next book that I want to do will be hopefully a series of books. And it's not just me, there's a team of us working on this because it's a huge project, but it's chronicling the history of the AMT Star Trek kits, or basically the Star Trek model kits in general, focusing volume 1 or the first one on the AMT Star Trek kits, beginning with the classic Enterprise and then going all the way through the motion picture production. So basically, 1966 through, 1979. And it's because there's a lot of information out there, and about the changes in the kit, especially the Enterprise, the original Enterprise. And of course, we have round 2, which is in South Bend, which is only a 2-hour drive from here. In fact, there's 2 of us that are going there tomorrow to do research with them to
that's awesome.
take a look and see what they have. So,
people say, how much is it? How many more Star Trek books can there be? Or how much? It's like there's always another layer to this incredible experience, whatever route it takes. And as you have said, that I keep finding too, there's always one particular niche, some bigger than others, that are going to totally pull at people's heartstrings, much less just, give them a smile and a memory, or be relevant to today, or to be shared with people. And the world, culture, technology, our cam phones, where we had to we didn't have wireless, they had to retrieve those cameras. So much in culture has accelerated and evolved so quickly that just in the span of this little franchise and all of its, roots, all of its arms, from what's actually on screen and made to things like tracking model kits and tracking the NASA Smithsonian, all of those things along the way, the cultural context behind it has, going from email campaign, the original mail campaigns, paper and stamps, we always call it, to what what does a protest movement look like in the 60s versus a protest movement today? Today,
Right.
there, you get a Twitter campaign, you get a hashtag, but just keeping that not only known, but making it live for. It's like an actor who goes back and actually does a period play in period costuming, and how if you're wearing 27 layers of clothing that took 4 hours to button individual buttons because there's no zippers and no Velcro, it's like doing the authentic costuming totally informs how you're moving and totally gives new life to Shakespeare's dialogue, or just, it's just like going back to the time and keeping that alive in some way.
Right. And
it seems silly. We're only talking about the 60s and 70s, but the world has changed so much just culturally in our everyday lives. And going back to those details, I'm all for anybody doing any of that. And then when it overlaps Star Trek, it's what we try to do constantly on the Trek Files, is remember to bring the context. And I've been around a few decades, the things that I just breeze right past, that I hopefully either I or somebody will stop and say, no, wait, what was that like? What was it like to lick a stamp and not pull it off a page, much less have a stamp at all?
Or that time period where you had to wait for a response and not knowing, it wasn't instantaneous like it is now. You would wait for the mail carrier to come, or you'd wait to hear those brakes, and the blinkers go with the UPS truck. I still remember, in the house being able to hear that, stopping and blink, 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 and the UPS carrier coming out with, my latest Lincoln Enterprise purchase or acquisition, because it was too big for the mail to send, and not knowing when you write to someone, if they're going to respond, how they're going to respond, and what they're going to send back. All of that was,
and the idea that you might write a letter and it takes but 6 months and you get a letter and you're thrilled to have that.
Right. Yeah.
It's not quite I suddenly flashed to Music Man in the Wells Fargo wagon. The song. It's not quite that, but it's that same vein.
Right. Yeah, it's right. Wait, you got a package,
Yeah. And we still get it. Now, the fact that Amazon brings it a day later or 2 days later, but it's still, you still get your thing,
Right.
It's not quite the buildup. Wow, so many. Look who's in this chat. Your wife and your son are in here. Well, she says again here, a lot of aerospace in Southern California. We really do need to wrap up, but I've enjoyed this so much. Well, I think we were talking about a lot of that already.
Yeah, the Southern California connections. One of the things that I found when I was there in 2019, because they had at the Nixon Museum, they had a display there in conjunction with the Apollo anniversary. And there was a large cutout of the state of California that was populated by all of the contractor names, from California that supported the Apollo program. And it's just amazing, to see how many of them were connected with California, Southern California in particular. And so that's one thing that I touch on as well in depth is talking about, California's connection to the aerospace industry and how that helped Gene Roddenberry. Because, Desilu Studios wasn't located that very far from Fullerton and Irvine, where you had, Douglas Aircraft and Rockwell. A lot of them big aerospace contractors were located very close to Hollywood.
Well, Rocketdyne
he had access
around the way, and
he had access, to all this expertise. And what helped him immensely, of course, was the fact that Gene Roddenberry was a pilot. So he could talk shop. So there was this instant respectability, independent that he was a Hollywood guy, being able to talk with these engineers and talk shop. So that helped him get into doors that might not be accessible to others that didn't have that background, that he had. And one of the big things that Roddenberry did was he not only actively solicited outside help from these aerospace contractors through writing them, I want footage, I want models, I'm working on this new television series, can you help me? But he followed through with that. He followed through with that and actually used that. I mean, we see that in Trouble with Tribbles with, as obvious as the K7 models, we see that in the Jeppesen flight computers that Spock is using, to calculate, I'm working on it, the episodes that you saw.
The little hand.
Yeah, the little hand disk computers. And they're everywhere. There's evidence of this, incorporating that. Now, it helped also that Roddenberry surrounded himself with other pilots. You had Matt Jeffries, and people that worked in the service. So, that's something that the Southern California connection and the aerospace community connection in Southern California is big, and its influence is talked about in my book.
And this, kids, is another reason why I say it's sad that Star Trek is no longer made in LA and Hollywood. Yeah. Just saying. Just aside from all the selfish reasons, that's another part of the vibe that I hate to see it totally go. Nothing against Canada and Toronto, but I hate for the almighty, budget factor, which is important, to drive some of this. It is too expensive to film in LA sometimes when they could do it cheaper up there. Yeah. And CGI does replace a lot of this, but who's creating the CG? And well, a lot of them are still down here too. So there's that. I'm going to limit you to a 60-second answer to this, but I have to give a shout out here to Chris, to Chris Cushman, who was, there you go.
Hi, Chris.
There's a simple answer you can do in 30 seconds. Why is the design of the Enterprise in
have a whole episode on this? Well,
exactly.
I guess one of the reasons I think that endures, and because I have a picture. Well, I've got the 3-foot one back here, but I also have a large.
Oh, that's where it went. It's been missing for 20 years.
This is a picture.
Oh,
yeah, it was the real one, right? I wouldn't have to worry about my funding.
That's the postcard that Lincoln and Desilu used to send out.
Yeah, it's a black and white version of the 3-footer, but I also have a large print that I actually have hung outside the door of my office of the 11-footer. But even with the AMT models, it's a design that looks beautiful in almost every angle. So when you're looking at it, it's believable. It seems to hold up so well as a design that serves its well no matter what angle you're looking at it. It just and there's been studies, there's been articles written about the geometry of it and everything, but it just holds up so well. And I think your fans themselves can attest to this when they see it at the Smithsonian or even haul out their old AMT Enterprise.
I've seen psychological analyses of it back. It's been a while, but even talking about the feminine and the masculine in the design, and all this esoteric,
right.
Intellectual,
and again, it was such a pioneering design too. The scale of it, the shape of that, and even the company and the advertising agency that Desilu used to help promote the original series. And this was one of my posts that I had, was they issued a little cardboard Enterprise to send this out to their to the networks and the affiliates to show them that this is the spaceship, because it was so unusual, and they printed it correctly. They didn't put it upside down. They printed it correctly because the advertising agency recognized that this ship was something special, and we all know that it's special because even at the opening of the every episode, you know, it's these are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. You know,
Well, it just broke the
it's
you
the story
knew
of
it was
that.
instantly future, because the future had always been. It's funny now that SpaceX is landing boosters on their tail fins, because you know, we went from the 50s models to the stacks, to this, you know, to the Titan and the Redstone Titan 2, and then the Saturn 5 2, and what was the one before 5? 2? 3B, 2B. Anyway, I'm getting nerdy myself too. I'm
Sure.
smarting myself. Anyway, everything had been a stack until the space shuttle, and the space shuttle was still a stack. But this idea that it was made in space so it wouldn't need a gravity beating, you know, configuration,
Right.
though, which is what people got pissed at the JJ movies about, building it on Earth. Well, okay, anyway. But the fact that it broke all those, that's what Gene wanted. He wanted something not terrestrially bound.
Right.
And the fact that then, just artistically, the fact that it broke all those, it unticked all those boxes of what was familiar. And people, when they first saw it, on one hand had to go, that's a spaceship?
Right.
Thing, you know, but we already had the whole flying saucer mentality in our minds too, from UFO pop culture. So the saucer is out there, but then here's all the nacelles and pylons and, you know, aeronautical. Anyway,
Right.
I'm waxing poetic here, but that's why.
When they introduced the shuttlecraft, you know, and having this small hangar bay and everything, it was just like, oh my gosh, and, you know, that's like F4 is landing on an aircraft carrier. You know, I mean, it's something that the
and you got a Navy. Well, it's Air Force. You can have naval flyers. But it's like the Navy Air Force mishmash there. I've got to move us along here. Although your son is saying, who is your least favorite Star Trek? Like that's a loaded question or something he knows well.
Who is my least favorite main Star Trek character? Oh gosh, I love them all. It's like saying, who is your favorite child, Luke?
I don't know if that was. I thought that maybe that was a loaded question. He was setting you up or something. So Scott is saying, as a NASA nerd kid, this is ticking a lot of boxes. The book is, so can't wait. Let me see. Absolutely, William. Where are all the model kits from Discovery, Lower Decks, Picard, Prodigy? Eagle Moss, the little ship model people are working on all these. But as far as the plastic model kit community,
well, I should point out, I just came back from Wonderfest. Which is this huge gathering in St. Louis, or excuse me, in Louisville, Kentucky. They round 2 is reissuing the second long box edition of the Klingon ship in the second long box. It's going to be out this year. So
can you still send off for the jacket?
No, you can't set off the jacket, and it doesn't include the lights. That was one thing I talked to him. I says, "Are you going to include the lighting kit?" You know, so that
the grain of wheat bulbs and the
little grain of wheat bulbs, you know, in the Klingon ship, because the Klingon ship was an awesome model kit. I mean, it's sort of like the Empire Strikes Back, you know, of Star Trek model kits. The Enterprise was gorgeous, but of course it had its issues with the warpness, you know, the sagging nacelles and the difficulty with especially the early lighted version of the design of it. But the Klingon ship, they seem to have learned their lesson, and they said, okay, we're going to make the Klingon ship right. And they did. You know, it was an amazing kit. So it was a worthy sequel, a worthy follow-up.
Well, they could afford, the Enterprise sold so well, they could afford the luxury of saying, we're going to go all this trouble.
That's right. In fact, you hit the nail on the head, because there's that correspondence with AMT and Stephen Whitfield, same character, where he's saying, we've got to get this second kit right, because fans are expecting quality, and we need to get the second kit right. And AMT listened to them, and you know, because they mapped it. I mean, the kit is extremely accurate. It's extremely well done. It has a few little issues, but even the lighting that they kit that they put in there, the grain of wheat bulbs, yeah, they were problematic and everything, but it was a lot better than the original kit. But yes, they're going to reissue that. They were, from what I understand, they were going to do it next year, but the 55th anniversary is this year, so they kind of upped it so that they could
rushing it. Okay,
the original artwork, sort of like what they did with the Star Trek Long Box 2 that came out last year.
Every time I hear Long Box, I think of Long March. Like,
Yeah, there was the
which
short
has nothing to do with anything, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, the long box versus the
So
short box.
Zirconic 9 is coming up with an admission here, getting it on the family reunion here.
Skippy. Okay, I see.
Or maybe not, but thank you, Zirconic, for adding so much on all. Let me see. Get off the feed, Skippy. This has been fun. Okay, Donnie, just totally sidebar here. Thank you, Donnie, for noticing this, for noting that, and apparently jumping into something currently, not of our topic today, but there we go. I'm looking. We really do need to wrap up. As much as I hate this, this is awesome.
Oh, these are great questions.
We can do really another. I hope you're getting. Are you getting to promote the Kickstarter a lot? Are other people as smart as me? Finally,
yes. Yeah, the model. I see a lot of some discussion about the model kits. Yeah, the model kit is.
If you're new to the feed today, thanks for coming by and sharing that. I hope you've enjoyed this too. What are you saying here, May? Is it possible to just pledge for the book and don't need the other?
Sure, you could pledge any amount. There's this. You don't even have to receive anything as a program. They're the first
perkless? Do you have perkless?
Yes, there are perkless. There's a perkless level where you can just contribute anything that you want, and you don't have to expect anything in return, other than my sincere thanks.
So yay for minimalism. That's fine. That's fine. As Christoph pointed out here, yay. Star Trek is meant to be filmed in space. Okay, Christoph. Until we get to that point, the AR wall is not everything. Chris pointing out that Toronto has a massive aviation history.
Yes, the Avro Arrow. Yes, by all means. Chris Gaynor has written a wonderful book. He is the editor of Quest Magazine. He's done a lot of research. Rob Godwin with Apogee Books, based in Canada. I know those folks very well, and they've done some amazing work. So by no means minimize contributions from our neighbors in the north. The Avro Arrow was an amazing vehicle. As well as the crew that worked on that originally, that after the Avro Arrow was canceled, came and worked on the Apollo program.
Oh,
so yes, yeah, there are a lot of Canadians that helped us get to the moon, indeed.
All right. Well, it looks like Dwight says, I hear long box, I think comic books. That's true. You can tell my head comes out of politics, not comics, but I'm thinking of
that model kit was an amazing thing. I mean, one of the things that I had to vet when I was doing my research on the AMT Enterprise was the claim that they produced 1 million kits within the first year. And there were some doubters, including those, in the know in the industry. But I eventually managed to turn them around through correspondence and conversations and everything about how, yeah, it's possible for them to produce 1 million kits in 1 year. Now, they had to go through multiple molds because the aluminum molds, which were least expensive to produce, simply wore out numbers like that. Yeah. So they eventually went to steel molds, and that's where obviously you see a lot of their variations, in the kit over time. But the numbers just one of the classic pieces of course.
I'm amazed they didn't have to change the name of the company to SMT then.
Yes. the one of the pieces of correspondence that I had was found in the collection at the UCLA Roddenberry papers. It's a memo from Bob Justman. And by the way, Bob Justman's memos are fantastic. I think a wonderful book would just be a collection of his memos.
He
writes them with such humor, with such... some of them are pages in length. If you've ever had a chance to go through some of them, they're just amazing. But he's got this one memo where he's talking about the AMT kit. And he's saying, we all know that this kit is not that great. But it's selling 1 million kits before the end of the year. And there's a big coffee stain on it. Now, this memo goes to Gene Roddenberry. So I'm just picturing Roddenberry seeing this memo. And he gets to the 1 million kits. And his coffee's like, he does a spit take.
Yeah. Is it a nice
coffee?
Nice round coffee stain or a?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's filled with coffee, so I could
what
just
if he slams his cup down and it overfills the cup? And
I could just see that, when he sees $1 million, dollar signs are starting to appear. Although they never sold any of the AMT kits through Lincoln Enterprises, they did promote them. Because you'll see on the box, you can send away for a catalog, free catalog inside, and it's right where as seen on NBC. And it's Gene Roddenberry's Lincoln Enterprises, where he puts a little slip in there, and you can write to Gene Roddenberry's Enterprise and get a free catalog for his Lincoln Enterprises. So he was promoting it right under NBC's nose.
Oh yeah, well it was licensing, so but everything was in such infant stages then. If it was more than a T-shirt or a lunchbox, no one or a Whitman licensed book like they did, then it was all explored territory. I mean, and then model kits was maybe the next thing. So yeah. Well, gosh, Glenn, this has been amazing.
Oh, it's been fun. You've got some really good questions from your folks.
I have a good backstage behind the scenes audience here. And business sided and all of that too. So and we're global. So everybody brings all of that up. So anyway, so once again, everybody, let's pop it up here. This is Inspired Enterprise. Glenn's done so much other work, but his Kickstarter right now is all about this. And so if you can jump over that, I know we've had people saying that they got on and just since we've been on the air, they've gone over. And so, we'll share this. This will be up on our feeds, and it's going to be uneditable since we did the whole thing start to finish. So I hope people won't be intimidated by the 2-hour time limit here.
If you can't see the link, but just go to Kickstarter and type in Inspired Enterprise, and you'll find it, because mine is the only Inspired Enterprise title of a fundraiser out there. So if you aren't, or even if you're not familiar with Kickstarter, you can just go to their webpage and type that in to see it. And then of course,
this is Kickstarter. So if you don't make the goal, you get nothing.
Right. It's all or nothing. Yeah. At this point. And I only have 2 weeks to go. I think there's 15 days to go on it. But hey, I appreciate it's a dual promotion, because you're promoting the book, which will be out no matter what. But your Kickstarter funds, the money that I receive, will help me cover costs for these archives, because travel is expensive. There's 3 main archives that I want to visit to do some more research, and then of course the licensing fees that I mentioned, and then whatever's left over for promotion, to help promote the book, because it's a small publisher, and whatever promotion I can do. But this being on your show certainly does help.
Okay, well, we'll have to get this up and get some, and maybe we can pull a clip or two out of this. Give me your 30-second pitch
about Inspired, the elevator pitch
for yes.
Oh, well, I'm writing a Star Trek book as a former NASA historian that will cover NASA's connections to Star Trek, the original series, as well as the Smithsonian and other relative unknown individuals that contributed to the original series. You're going to see.
Glenn, there are so many Star Trek books out there. Is this really a different approach, a different topic?
Yes, it is. That has not been covered as far as I know, because I am a Star Trek fan as well, and I'm well read, and I have not really seen anything on it. And I think the advantage is because of my former connections with NASA, where I've been able to look at the archives and get access to some of this material that most people, can't get.
I'm just going to say, between the original research, the original interviewing you're doing, some of which I'm very envious of, and you've been at this for a while, and your track record, people seeing you with the 55 Enterprise model kit anniversary and Klingon again. No, it's an amazing topic, and everybody really needs to. It is a totally unexplored area, or a lot of dots laying out there that have not been connected, much less exposed. So no, it's an awesome project.
Yeah, I think it'll make even the diehard fans appreciate even more the original series contributions and how all of these other entities and these agencies were influential, in shaping the image of Star Trek, because all these other individuals did work behind the scenes, ones that you just don't know about. It's like, oh my gosh, who was this person? What did he look like?
Well, finding faces to the names was a big gift. But no, yeah, and that, again, that mutual love affair between NASA and Star Trek was there. It was baked in the cake. It was in the DNA.
And they really needed that, especially after the Apollo 1 fire. That occurred in 1967. And so, Star Trek was being renewed.
Midway through season 1.
Yeah, in 67, 68. In fact, the haunting thing I remember is that Star Trek, the original series, was on Thursday nights, right? And the
third season.
Yeah. The day before the Apollo 1 fire was aired, the episode Tomorrow's Yesterday, the one with
oh wow, I'd never made that connection. Right, the Air Force pilot. Yeah, they're back in time.
Going back. And so there's this classic scene with him on the bridge in his orange jumpsuit, and he's talking to a whore and so forth. And there's also a classic photo of Roger B. Chaffee in a very similar orange suit. And Roger B. Chaffee, of course, was killed as one of the Apollo 1 crew members. So it's kind of this haunting thing where, this accident occurred, this episode talking about, a young pilot and getting aboard the Enterprise. And then the whole period of time where NASA is trying to recover during this time, and individuals watching Star Trek, knowing that we get through this. Okay, we have to get through this to move on, because Kirk talks about, what if we stopped at the Apollo program? Remember his classic speech
Risk is our business in Return to Tomorrow.
Yeah, right. That wonderful speech, risk is our business, risk is our business. And so, I even get choked up even recalling all of that, because NASA needed Star Trek and Star Trek needed NASA. And so there's this wonderful symbiosis, going on during that period of time in 67, 68. So,
yeah. Anyway, I can't wait for best of luck with everything with the Kickstarter.
Great.
Yes. And everybody go support. This is amazing. If there's been anything worth supporting in recent time, there's a lot of good projects out there, but this is certainly one of them. So Glenn, thanks a lot for coming on and sharing and making me smile and making my 12-year-old NASA kid come through, or my 8-year-old NASA kid, maybe even. But thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Wow. How about that? We got to the chat, so there's no post chat to do. I'm not going to look at the parrots this week. This has been enough show here for all. So thank you to Glenn once again. Everybody go support as you can. And I think that'll do us. That will do us for today, everybody. So things coming up. I do want to I've got a couple of things going on here in Trekland that I do want to remind you about. Had a great time last night. For one thing, the recording is up, but last night I was over on Mission Log Live, and we talked about Strange New Worlds debuting this week. Yay! Everybody's excited about that. People just the New Yorkers had their premiere event. Glenn was mentioning Wonderfest, which has come on the radar, especially more and more these last few years, as a wonderful model makers, model builders convention, but celebration of things there in Louisville, Kentucky. But coming up Saturday, virtually for the entire world, my friend Chris Smith, who has a unique connection with DeForest and Carolyn Kennedy, Carolyn Kelly. Can I talk? So this Saturday on her new podcast, Ever Near, can we get this? There we go. Oh, come on. You were fine. It's called D-Day, Remembering DeForest Kelley, June 17th. That's this Saturday at 10:30 Pacific, so 1:30 Eastern, on the Twitch channel for NBD Media. Go. Mike and Denise Akuta, Dan Madsen, my old boss with the fan club, myself, some fans other people who have been, and I'm leaving out lots of names. It's an hour live talking about DeForest Kelley, the impact of him, the impact of McCoy's character, and just remembering some fun things. Everybody's going to bring their memory banks and boxes. This is the anniversary month of Dee's passing. He passed on June 11th. The last year was Not a great one. His final year, June 11th, 99. And I'm sure people have a lot of uplifting stories and some, and Carolyn, who had had a muscular disease that he had been caring for, actually outlived Eve, which was, tragic in itself because she needed caretaking help too. But they were such a lovely couple, very private. Anyway, that's a great thing happening at 10:30 live, 10:30 Pacific, 1:30 Eastern. Do the math for our friends around the world. That's this Saturday. All right. The other thing I need to mention that I have been neglecting is I'm really excited for my old stomping grounds. Nothing old about it, though. SoonerCon is in its 31st edition. The guest lineup is as great as ever. John Scalzi, my friend Kevin Dillmore, we're finally doing a convention for the first time in, 10 or 12 years together. Kevin, who, co-writes with Dayton Ward. Dayton would have come there, but he had a family. I know. But Kevin, also the last few years, over a decade, working at Hallmark as their in-house writer and support person for Star Trek properties, from the ornaments on down. I do a recap with Kev at Comic-Con, if not Vegas, every year when we have conventions. So I'm really looking forward to that live. And it's also going to be the convention premiere of Cadet Alice. We're going to take it very easy, but we're going to have some fun with that in the kids programming room, I should say. So that is June 30th, July 1st and 2nd. The last weekend, technically, of June, there in Norman, Oklahoma, back home for me, Greater Oklahoma City on the south side, right off I-35, Embassy Suites Hotel, SoonerCon.com. There's still the early bird pricing available. It's in a really good spot for access, huge parking for daytimers. It's really, you're getting Texas, Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, Colorado. It's really, SoonerCon's really turned into a big regional convention. It's old school and yet very modern. I'll just say that. It's a hotel con that's got everything, anime, cosplay, all the things. And we have a lot of fun. And I'm having a lot of fun because of back home peeps. And my other half, the assistant script coordinator, J. Kelly Burke, is going to be with me this year, and Cadet Alice too. So we're going to have a lot of fun. SoonerCon.com. If you're in the region, make plans to go if you hadn't thought about it. Even though they have people from the East Coast and West Coast coming in too. Great lineup of guests. Billy West, the voice of Bart Simpson, is another. It's not even in that graphic. They have a ton of voice actors and anime folks and cosplayers going to be there too. Check it out. That's that. This is Saturday. Check out the tape last night from Mission Log Live when you get a chance. That was awesome. Bernadette Croft, who was the costume designer from Picard, who was making one of her first baby steps into live interviewing. I think I helped win her over to the field. So I even hooked her up to be a Portal 47 guest down the line. So that's been awesome. So we continue to live in amazing times. Everything from the next season of Strange New Worlds coming to people like Glen. Is there anything new to talk about in old Star Trek? Are you kidding? Everything is new in Star Trek. Thanks to you guys for being here. And I need to say, before we totally leave the thing, thanks as we're doing here. Thanks for all of our Patreon folk helping me out. So thank you all, our TTL Club, Diana Hopkins, Robin Wilson, Lawrence Todd, Anne-Marie Siegel, Justin Porteous, Galinda Bruton, Chris Jiggins, Pranakasha Productions, Comedy Forecast, and Andrew Jazimski, and our live wires, Robert McLean, Byron Bailey, J.R. Poole, Habib Gunn Johnson, on Alan O'Hensey. I'm getting choked up. Dave Gregory, Tobias Rex, Donna S. Runyon. Yes, Donna, why did I do that? And Casey Shafsky. That was an hour and a half interview, gang. I feel like it's a long Portal 47 night. Thank you all so much. If you want to help out with my Patreon, we're getting into the month. They do this once a month, the way I have it set up. $5, $10, very simple. Glenn had a really simple Kickstarter level system. Didn't get into a million perks. Mine is just patreon.com/Trekland Live. Love it if you can go over and help support what we're doing these days. And of course, it's summer. We are in summer. If you're coming this way, or even if you hadn't thought about it, come out to LA, do a Trekland trek with me. We'll get to 4 amazing location sites for Star Trek that you custom design yourself. We'll have a fast food lunch. I will pick you up, take you back to your hotel or wherever you are here in Greater SoCal. We'll work it out ahead of time. TreklandTreks.com if you can. And if it's Tuesday, that means it's a new Trek Files also over at Roddenberry. Over at our Facebook page, we have the docs this week. You want to see it. It's our once-a-year trip back into the fan mail, the mailbag from the 70s. And this time we've got more of the kids' letters to Gene. It's a hoot. It's a lot of fun. John Champion himself is my fan mail guest, so we have a lot of fun diving into that. Check that out at our Facebook page or wherever fine podcasts are caught. Of course, we were laughing about merch. All our merch is at the TeePublic store. The links of all this are at my site. Get on my mail list if you haven't done that. I'm behind to get out a newsletter and a new flash poll for fans. I've got some ideas. It's the launch of a new season of Strange New. It's Emmy voting season, the FYCs. I think the corporate money is leaning more on Picard than on any of the other series. So that's not a bad thing, Mary. We'll see what's up with that. And of course, the writer's strike continues. The actors at SAG-AFTRA, their negotiations are ongoing. Their contract is up the end of June. Will there be a double whammy strike set up with actors and writers? We will see. We will see. Meanwhile, next week, we'll be back with another Trekland Tuesdays live. Yes, I have to check that. We will be jiggering around a little bit the last week of the month while I'm in Oklahoma. We'll see how that goes. But meanwhile, I'm so glad you all are here. Thank you for your support, the Patreon, just being here, throwing in with the chat. It was great to have Glenn and his entire family, and Skippy too, with us today. So as I leave you guys, gals, peeps, just please, stay healthy. Do all the things. Stay woke. Check the sources. And yeah, trek well, everybody.